Victoria 2, a cult classic and influential title in Paradox history, one that by now is kind of forgotten, but still holds a good amount of influence. So what's Victoria 2, you ask? Oh boy, okay, take a breath. Take a deep breath. Okay, let's go. Before Victoria 3 brought pops back and revamped warfare, before Crusader Kings 3 brought its modern UI and 3D characters, before Imperator Rome let us have legionaries build roads, before Hearts of Iron 4's naval mechanics made me pull out my hair, before Stellaris allowed us to mate with alien species and commit mass genocide at the same time, before EU4 made us fear the big blue blob, and before Crusader Kings 2 brought incest back, there was a game. A game which both socialists and capitalists could enjoy. A game Republicans and monarchists could wrap their arms around and embrace. A game which ever since has held a legendary status among certain Paradox Games fans. Victoria 2. Okay, so what is Victoria 2 though? And what's up with the 2? For starters, it's the second Victoria game, dude. Silly. And of course, if you're interested in any of the Victorias, any other Paradox Grand Strategy title, or anything else at massive sales, then make sure to check out partner of the channel, Instant Gaming, who constantly offer great discounts for any old or brand new game for any platform. And you can do so by following my link below. Victoria 2 is a grand strategy game taking place during the age of new imperialism, which is to say the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. This means that you're probably gonna want to play as one of the big boys and girls, like Britain, France, Prussia, Austria, or Russia. Or go crazy and play as the sick man of Europe, the USA, or any other nation on the planet. Like with Paradox games in general, the game gives you this massive freedom to play whoever you want to, with the obvious caveat of having to deal with the consequences of playing like Belgium when France is your neighbor. What originally struck me immediately, and what I find to be so extremely timeless, is the overlay campaign map. When you zoom all the way out, you get this beautiful paper-like map which looks like it's been made physically. You kind of see the seams in the paper and all, and it just looks like an actual hand-drawn map outside of the game. But even the real map, when zoomed a bit down, has a certain charm to it even now, even though, at the very lowest part, the game is obviously visually outdated. Compared to newer titles, yeah, there isn't much to see here. But to be fair, Paradox games were never that good looking before EU4. But the visuals are not why people enjoyed Victoria 2, or why they still enjoy it. No, people enjoy Victoria 2 because it's so grand, because it was so unique among Paradox titles. Now, I'm not saying Victoria 2 is the best Paradox game, but it does a few things which really sets it apart from the rest. Where Hearts of Iron 4 is all war and conflict until your game grounds to a halt, where the EU and the CK series are experiences where you go from war to peace faster than you can say Prussian Space Marines, Victoria 2 was, at least in my experience, a slower, more mind-gamey game. You see, the thing about Victoria 2, the thing about this whole time period, is the ambition of especially European powers to exert control over the rest of the world. But it's also a time period when, at least after the Congress of Berlin, that European powers tried to, get land without having to throw hands with each other. This is the exact reason why Victoria 2 has the potential to have many fewer wars than other Paradox games, although as we'll see later, it's not all peaceful. So how then, in a game about literal imperialist colonialist empires, do we avoid warring at all times? Well friend, we have this here little thing called spheres of influence, and boy, it's quite amazing actually. Here's how it works. If you are a great power, which only 8 countries may be at any time and automatically makes you a badass, you gain influence points every month. And how much you gain is based on a variety of factors, but which I won't really get into here, essentially allowing you to assert your influence over other non-great power countries. In the Diplomacy tab, you get a list of every nation on Earth. Oh, and yeah, since this is old Paradox, your menus are completely separate windows, but which somehow kind of works in this game, and which I guess Paradox kind of have gone back to recently. Anyway, this is where you get to choose which countries you wish to dominate, befriend, and just chill within your sphere of influence. However, you're likely to almost always be competing with the other great powers over the influence of these nations, so you will basically be racing to assert influence throughout your game. Now this is where it gets slightly more complicated. A nation may already be under another nation's sphere of influence, and what happens then? Well, it'll be harder for you to sphere this country, as the overlord is likely to earn more influence points than you already do. In addition, every month, as long as you are influencing a country, you can influence points in that country. An overlord is likely to have many of these influence points already, and may use these points to diplomatically and in a much more direct way determine what this country does, including whether it wants to even allow you to attempt to influence it or not. This allows the overlord, both you and other great powers, several options over your subject, like decreasing the state's opinion of another country, increase its opinion of you, completely remove the influence gain capability of another great power in that country, and more. You can even basically force a sphereling to become your ally or vassal, since you now assert so much power over it, and even though the sphereling is allied to your enemy, it will not be able to join a war against you. And that's pretty neat, but of course the same goes for the spheres of other powers. Now, why would you even want to diplomatically sphere nations? Well, like stated before, it's a good way to gain military allies or to lock certain countries away from your enemies. However, another main reason is that adding a sphere to your nation creates a sort of common market where the goods are shared between your countries. If that kinda came out of left field, that's because apart from just war, Victoria 2 actually offers a massively deep trade and population mechanic, which before Victoria 3 is the most similar game to Imperator Rome in many respects. Honestly, the population mechanic and how to manage it is rather complicated, and controlling the economy and politics which come with it is just wow, but the main concepts are fairly simple. You produce products, and these products influence how much money you make, and by controlling your taxes and tariffs, you may also influence how much your state income will be. Now, tariffs is another interesting thing when it comes to spheres of influence, because when you sphere a country, tariffs are removed between them. So, if you somehow manage to sphere China, which has a massive population of craftsmen or artisans, you might be outproduced and your economy might suffer because of it. But back to population. Your country is made up of several pops, among them the peasants, artisans, the priest class, and capitalists. Now these all serve their own purposes, like the priests who act as teachers and increase literacy among your population, which can then produce good workers, and your capitalists produce infrastructure, which makes for a better economy and military production long term. In addition, there are elections which will determine what type of policies and tax laws you can enact, and your entire economy is pretty much determined by who is in power, which is kinda cool, but also super scary if you don't know how the system works. But of course, Victoria 2 is also warfare, and you'll have to relatively carefully manage how your armies are made up, since you can recruit infantry, cavalry, and artillery, kinda like in EU4. You also have navies to worry about. The thing about warfare though is that you never really want to do too much of it or be too greedy. Victoria 2 has a system called infamy, very similar to Victoria 3's or to the aggressive expansion mechanic found in other games where attacking too many states, being caught justifying or grabbing too much land at once, would call too much unwanted attention to you. By unwanted attention, I mean that other major powers will team up against you and whoop your ass into the dust. Imagine being Napoleon, just that you're probably not as overpowered, and you'll meet his end much quicker than he did. Yeah, even if you can avoid the coalition wars, you really should. Like in other Paradox games, you'll have to think about technology, which in Victoria 2 not only opens up production possibilities, but also completely new ideologies which changes up the game and opens up new avenues for your nation. Ideologies like Marxism, nationalism, and even fascism will allow you to shape your nation, production, and population. Now we could talk for hours about Vicky 2's systems, but for the purposes of this video, I won't go into more detail than that. Now I am a relative youngster in Paradox terms. I began with CK2 in early 2013 and played Victoria 2 only after I'd become an experienced player. But every Paradox game is different, and it took a few tens of hours to learn Victoria 2, and even now I'm not fully Vicky 2 fluent. But coming from the fleshed out later games, Victoria 2 can seem kind of empty and limited. The elephant in the room here is of course Victoria 3, the sequel to Vicky 2, which released in 2022, over a decade after the first one. Victoria 3 brought an entirely new map, visuals that blows the first one out of the water, new government mechanics, building systems, warfare mechanics, market mechanics, and basically, as you might be able to tell and already know, Victoria 3 is an entirely different game from the first one. This also sparked a bunch of backlash from parts of the community, with some of the criticism being very reasonable, and some perhaps not so much. I think Victoria 3 is an amazing game in its own right, and while it has a few shortcomings, I'd actually much rather play this third installment than Victoria 2, partially because of how it fleshed out the various cultures of the world, and I generally prefer its systems of trade, markets, and production. And yes, I am a sucker for a beautiful map too. But that doesn't mean Victoria 2 is any worse off inherently. Its foundations made it great to begin with, and it offers a very different and very interesting approach to Paradox Grand Strategy, one that honestly feels more Cold War-like than the very wargamey titles that came after it. So yeah, Victoria 2 was awesome, and it still is awesome. It has an awesome looking campaign map, it has some sweet diplomacy gameplay where you need to compete with other nations diplomatically to rule the world most efficiently, your population determines how your nation works, and politics have a lot to say as well. And I venture that the game did a lot to influence both the fundamentals of Victoria 3, but also Imperator Rome, two games which in my opinion are somewhat misunderstood by the community, but which I love dearly. Thank you so much for watching, friends. If you enjoyed the video, I hope you leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to the channel. And make sure to follow my link below to get awesome discounts on instant gaming. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.